I had barely stepped out of my truck when I heard an explosion, an ear-splitting shriek cutting across the lake air like a siren. A woman in a mud-streaked floral dress was marching down the gravel road, waving a clipboard like it was a warrant. Section 4.7 violation. That red maple needs to come down or you'll be fined $500, she barked, jabbing her finger at the tree in my front yard like it had personally insulted her HOA. Ever been threatened with eviction over a tree? Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because this story spirals faster than tonight's breaking news. That maple? It was just the spark. She didn't know yet, but I wasn't some clueless newcomer. I knew every inch of this land, including the legal fact that I didn't just own the cabin, I owned the whole damn lakefront. You! Yes, you, Mr. Prescott! She waved a clipboard wildly, her tangled blonde curls bouncing with each emphatic gesture. That red maple is a direct violation of Section 4.7 of the Willowmere HOA bylaws. All trees must be oak varieties to maintain the aesthetic integrity of our community. I turned slowly, my coffee still steaming in my hand, and faced the human tornado making its way up my gravel path. This had to be Loretta Vance, the HOA president my realtor had briefly mentioned. Though briefly mentioned was proving to be a catastrophic understatement. She thrust the clipboard under my nose, a perfectly manicured nail tapping at a highlighted paragraph. You have 48 hours to remove that tree and replace it with an approved oak specimen, or face a $500 fine. Continued noncompliance will result in property seizure. Her smug smile revealed slightly yellowed teeth, and her eyes gleamed with what I could only describe as predatory satisfaction. Confused and admittedly irritated, I kept my voice measured. Good morning to you too, Miss Vance. I don't believe we've been formally introduced. I'm Nolan Prescott. I extended my hand, which she pointedly ignored. I wasn't aware of any tree restrictions. My purchase agreement didn't mention specific landscaping requirements beyond general maintenance. I took a sip of my coffee, refusing to mirror her agitation. The cabin behind me, a modest two-bedroom A-frame with weathered cedar siding, had been love at first sight. The perfect retreat after years of bouncing between construction sites. The maple tree in question was mature and healthy, providing dappled shade for the deck, where I'd planned to spend my evenings watching the sunset over the lake. Could you show me where in my purchase documents this restriction is noted? Loretta's smile faltered momentarily, but she recovered quickly. It's in the HOA bylaws, which you agreed to upon purchase. Perhaps you should have read them more thoroughly? She sniffed, adjusting her plastic beaded necklace that clashed spectacularly with her already overwhelming outfit. I read everything I signed quite carefully, I replied, keeping my tone conversational while my mind raced. I had indeed reviewed all documents thoroughly, a habit from my engineering days where overlooking details could lead to structural failures. Would you mind if I took a closer look at that specific bylaw? Loretta clutched the clipboard tighter to her chest. I'll email you the relevant section. But ignorance isn't an excuse, Mr. Prescott. We have standards here at Willowmere. She took a step back, her heels sinking slightly into the soft ground. You'll regret coming here if you think you can disrupt our community. With that parting shot, she turned and clomped away, her dress fluttering in the breeze like misplaced laundry. I watched her retreat, noting how she paused to speak with another resident, gesturing back toward my cabin with animated movements. That afternoon, I spread my purchase documents across the kitchen table, reading every line for any mention of tree restrictions. Finding nothing, I opened my laptop and searched for the Willowmere HOA bylaws, which weren't posted publicly online. Odd for a legitimate organization. An email from Loretta arrived containing a PDF of what she claimed were the official bylaws, with Section 4.7 highlighted. All trees visible from the lake must be native oak varieties to preserve the historical aesthetic of Willowmere. The document looked suspiciously amateur, with inconsistent formatting and no official letterhead. I leaned back in my chair, gazing out at the maple tree with its vibrant spring foliage. Something wasn't adding up. The lake beyond shimmered in the afternoon sun, peaceful and unconcerned with human squabbles along its shores. That evening, a formal letter appeared in my mailbox on HOA letterhead, demanding compliance within 7 days, or further action would be taken, up to and including property seizure. I stood on my deck, the letter crumpled in my tightening grip, watching the sunset cast golden light across the water. My eyes narrowed as I spotted Loretta speaking with a group of residents across the lake, all occasionally glancing in my direction. I'd faced difficult clients and challenging projects throughout my career, but this felt different, personal, and inexplicably hostile. I smoothed out the letter, folded it precisely, and slipped it into my desk drawer. If Loretta Vance wanted a battle over a maple tree, she'd soon discover I wasn't someone who retreated at the first sign of resistance. That night, I dug deeper into my grandfather's will that had left me enough money to purchase this cabin. There was a reference to a parcel number in my grandfather's will, something about the Eastern Shore. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I flagged it for later. Right now, I had more pressing things to deal with, like an HOA president who declared war over a tree. The following morning, I ventured out early to inspect my property line markers, camera in hand to document the existing conditions. As I photographed the lakefront, a stocky man in faded denim overalls approached from the neighboring cabin. "Morning there. You must be the new owner. I'm Curtis Hale." His handshake was firm, honest, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. "Noticed you met our queen bee yesterday." I couldn't help but chuckle at his diplomatic description of Loretta Vance. "That's one way to put it. She seems particularly concerned about my maple tree." Curtis leaned against a nearby birch, crossing his arms comfortably. "Been here 15 years, and I've never heard of any oak-only rule until Loretta took over the HOA 3 years ago. She's been adding her own interpretations to the bylaws since day one." He lowered his voice conspiratorially, though no one else was around. "Between us, she used to fancy herself some kind of garden feng shui influencer online. Failed spectacularly when people realized her advice killed more plants than it helped. Now she takes out her frustrations on us with these power trips." This new information was illuminating, but raised more questions than it answered. Why would she target me specifically? I just moved in, Curtis shrugged, adjusting his cap. "Your cabin's prime real estate, best view on the lake. Word is there's an investor looking to buy up properties here, and Loretta gets a finder's fee for any sales she facilitates. Plus, she's paranoid about spies from the competing resort association across the lake. Thinks they're trying to undermine our HOA." I raised an eyebrow at this, finding it both amusing and concerning. "That sounds intense," Curtis nodded sagely. "You don't know the half of it. Just watch your back. Loretta's been spreading rumors that you're intentionally trying to disrupt the Willowmere aesthetic with that maple." He checked his watch. "Gotta run. Pipe emergency at the Wilson place. Good luck with the tree situation." As he walked away, I called after him. "Thanks for the heads up, Curtis. I appreciate it." Back inside, I researched the history of Lake Willowmere. The lake was named for a legend about ancient willows that once protected the land from storms, and historical photographs showed a diverse mix of trees surrounding the water, not just oaks. Around noon, my cabin went suddenly dark. The refrigerator's hum ceased, and my laptop switched to battery power. Power outage. I stepped outside to see if it affected the entire neighborhood, only to find every other cabin with functioning electricity. A text message appeared on my phone from an unknown number. "Electrical maintenance required on your line. Service will resume after inspection. Willowmere HOA Management." I didn't need an engineering degree to recognize this as a deliberate intimidation tactic. Fortunately, I'd packed an emergency generator for my remote work needs. As I set it up behind the cabin, I spotted Loretta watching from the community dock, her gaudy dress visible even at a distance. When she noticed me looking, she quickly turned away, nearly tripping on a loose board in her haste. The generator would keep my essentials running, but at a significant cost in fuel and convenience. That evening, another HOA letter arrived, citing an urgent assessment fee of $1,000 for electrical infrastructure concerns specific to my property. The arbitrary nature of these penalties was becoming obvious. Loretta was hoping financial pressure would force me to sell or leave. I left a voicemail with our old family attorney about the parcel reference, just in case. But for now, the immediate battle wasn't about history. It was about power lines and lies. Loretta wasn't letting up, and I had a feeling she was just getting started. The next day, I discovered neighbors were suddenly avoiding me. At the community mailboxes, a woman I'd briefly met during move-in hurried away when she saw me approaching. At the small local market, conversations hushed when I entered. Loretta had clearly been busy spreading her narrative. As I loaded groceries into my car, I noticed Curtis walking by. He made a subtle gesture indicating he wanted to speak privately and met me behind the store. "Just so you know, Loretta called an emergency HOA meeting last night. Only her supporters were officially notified. She showed photos of your property, claiming your tree is just the beginning of your plan to undermine Willowmere's property values. She's convinced everyone. You're a spy from Lakeside Haven Resort." I sighed, leaning against my car. "That's absurd. I'm a structural engineer who wanted a quiet place to work remotely." Curtis nodded sympathetically. Logic isn't Loretta's strong suit. Oh, and there's a woman named Meredith Lyle you should talk to. Newer resident, works at the bank. She seemed skeptical of Loretta's claims but was pressured into supporting the motion against you. That evening, as I worked by generator power, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. Concerned about HOA situation. Meet at Lakefront Coffee Shop tomorrow, 11 a.m. Meredith. A potential ally was welcome news, but I was becoming increasingly aware this battle over a maple tree represented something much larger. I spread the property records across my desk again, studying the boundaries and ownership history with renewed interest. If my suspicions were correct, Loretta Vance's reign of terror was built on shaky legal ground. I just needed to confirm a few more details before making my move. As darkness fell over the lake, I noticed a figure moving near my property line. I quietly stepped onto the deck and recognized Warren Tate, a retired real estate attorney who lived across the lake. He wasn't trespassing, merely observing from the public shoreline. When he saw me, he raised his hand in a subtle greeting, then pointed toward the county offices in the distance before walking away. The message was clear. The answers I needed were in the official records. Tomorrow would be a day for truth-seeking. The county records office was housed in a brick building that had likely looked outdated even in the 1970s. Inside, the smell of paper and dust filled the air as a clerk helped me locate the property records for Lake Willowmere. "These go way back," she commented, placing a heavy binder on the counter. "Not many folks interested in the old parcel maps anymore." I thanked her and settled at a nearby table, methodically photographing each relevant page. The documents revealed fascinating information about Willowmere's history, the original parcels, subsequent divisions, and a complex web of property lines that didn't quite match what the HOA claimed to control. Most interestingly, I found no record of a legally established homeowners association with authority over these properties. I'd need more time to fully understand what I was seeing, but one thing was becoming clear. Something wasn't right with the current power structure at the lake. Armed with this preliminary information, I made another discovery that afternoon at the bank where Meredith Lyle worked. After our coffee shop meeting was mysteriously canceled by text, which I suspected wasn't actually from her, I decided to visit her workplace directly. Meredith was a young professional with a nervous energy about her, constantly adjusting her glasses as we spoke in hushed tones near her desk. "The HOA accounts aren't right," she whispered, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "Loretta keeps the records hidden, but as a bank employee, I've seen some transactions that don't match what she tells residents. There are payments to her personal account that should be going to maintenance funds." She slid a folded paper across her desk. "These are dates and amounts. I can't do more without risking my job, but something's not right." I thanked her, impressed by her courage despite her obvious fear of Loretta's retaliation. That evening, an HOA meeting was scheduled at the community boathouse, one I hadn't been officially notified about but learned of through Curtis. I decided to attend, dressed in my navy sweater and dark khakis, a deliberate contrast to the casual lake attire most residents wore. My entrance caused an immediate hush in the room. Loretta, presiding at a folding table at the front, nearly dropped her gavel. Her flower print dress was particularly garish under the fluorescent lights, and her tangled hair seemed even more chaotic than usual. "Mr. Prescott," she said, recovering quickly, "this is a private meeting for association members in good standing. As you are currently in violation of community standards, I'll have to ask you to leave." I smiled pleasantly, taking an empty seat in the back row. "Actually, Ms. Vance, as a property owner at Willowmere, I have every right to attend. Please continue. I'm quite interested in hearing the agenda." Loretta proceeded with the meeting, repeatedly glancing my way with obvious discomfort. When she reached an agenda item labeled Compliance Issues, Lot 17, I recognized my property designation. "We have documented evidence that the owner of Lot 17 has deliberately damaged community electrical infrastructure," Loretta announced, clicking through poorly taken photographs showing normal wear on electrical boxes. None actually on my property. "The repair costs have necessitated an emergency assessment as previously communicated." I raised my hand slowly. "Ms. Vance, could you clarify where the HOA's powers come from? I mean, legally? Just curious." Her face twitched, and she quickly changed the subject. "We need to move on to the next item." But I noticed a few eyebrows rising around the room, seeds of doubt being planted. A middle-aged woman in the second row turned slightly to look at me, her expression thoughtful rather than hostile for the first time since my arrival. As the meeting continued, Loretta grew increasingly flustered, rushing through agenda items and cutting off questions. When an older resident asked about the maintenance budget, she deflected with vague references to ongoing projects and future improvements. By the time she called for a vote on increasing the quarterly dues, the atmosphere in the room had subtly shifted. A few residents who had nodded along at the beginning were now exchanging questioning glances. Loretta sensed the change too, her knuckles whitening around her gavel as she called for a show of hands. All in favor of the increase? Fewer hands rose than she'd clearly expected. Motion carries, she declared hastily, though I wasn't convinced she had actually counted. Meeting adjourned for today. She gathered her papers quickly, avoiding eye contact with everyone. As residents filed out, several stopped to quietly introduce themselves to me, including Warren Tate, the retired attorney I'd noticed observing my property. Interesting meeting, he commented dryly, his silver hair catching the light. You might want to look into the existing property covenants from 1953. They supersede any HOA bylaws. He handed me his business card with a phone number handwritten on the back. Call if you need a historical perspective. As the room emptied, Loretta remained at her table, furiously texting on her phone, occasionally shooting venomous glances my way. I gathered my documents and left, feeling the first sense of momentum shifting in my favor, though I knew this battle was far from over. The following morning, I awoke to find my property had been plastered with violation notices, not just for the maple tree, but for unapproved fence height, excessive window coverage, and unauthorized exterior color scheme, all issues that hadn't existed yesterday. As I removed the notices, photographing each one first, Curtis approached from his cabin. Loretta was out here at dawn with her enforcement committee, just her and that contractor who keeps trying to get renovation jobs in the community. He helped me pull down a particularly high notice. Word is, she's threatened to sue you for defamation after last night. But more folks are asking questions now. You've got people thinking. I nodded, appreciating his support. That's all I wanted, just to establish the facts before more damage is done. As I headed back inside to prepare for work, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line read, "Cease and desist, final warning." Loretta was escalating, but so was I. I'd already drafted a formal letter requesting the HOA's financial records and legal charter documentation. This chess match was entering its middle game, and I was preparing to send my queen into play. The cease and desist letter from Loretta was poorly formatted and filled with legal-sounding language that any actual attorney would find laughable. It demanded I immediately stop spreading falsehoods regarding the Willowmere Homeowners Association and threatened legal consequences for my slanderous statements questioning the legitimacy of a legally established community organization. I forwarded it to a lawyer friend for a professional opinion, who responded within hours. This wouldn't hold up in any court. There's no specific alleged defamatory statement identified, no demonstration of damages, and the letterhead isn't from a law firm. Classic empty threat. Armed with this reassurance, I focused on my next steps. I sent my formal request for HOA documentation by certified mail, ensuring Loretta would have to sign for it personally, and continued my research into the property records and covenants Warren had mentioned. What I discovered was fascinating. The original 1953 covenants for Willowmere established a simple set of neighborly agreements, nothing resembling the elaborate and restrictive rules Loretta had been enforcing. More importantly, the covenants required any community organization to be established through a 75% vote of all property owners, with proper legal registration, steps that had clearly never been taken. As I compiled this information, a notification popped up on my laptop. A new article had been published in a local business journal featuring an interview with Loretta Vance about the revitalization of the exclusive Willowmere lakefront community. The piece mentioned plans for luxury redevelopment and quoted Loretta saying she was in discussions with potential investors to elevate the Willowmere experience. Curtis's information about investor interest suddenly seemed much more relevant. Late that afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Meredith Lyle stood nervously on my doorstep, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid of being seen. "I didn't cancel our coffee meeting," she said quickly as I invited her inside. Loretta somehow intercepted the message. "She's been monitoring communications about you." Once inside, Meredith relaxed slightly, though she remained perched on the edge of my living room chair. "There's more you should know. Loretta found out you were involved in exposing an illegal HOA in Colorado 3 years ago. There was an article about it in a real estate journal. Now she's convinced you're some kind of professional hoax hunter sent to destroy Willowmere." I nearly choked on my water. That was completely different. The Colorado situation involved actual fraud and misappropriation of funds. I just happened to be the homeowner who noticed the discrepancies. Meredith nodded, adjusting her glasses. Loretta doesn't care about those details. She's telling everyone you're a paid operative working for Lakeside Haven Resort, here to devalue our property so they can buy the land cheaply. The accusation was so absurd I would have laughed if it weren't causing real damage to my reputation in the community. That's completely fabricated. I've never even been to Lakeside Haven. Meredith lowered her voice further. There's more. She's hired someone to inspect your property tomorrow for structural violations. I think they're looking for any excuse to condemn your cabin. I thanked Meredith for the warning, concerned about her own position. Won't Loretta suspect you've talked to me? Meredith stood to leave, a determined look crossing her face. Probably, but more of us are getting tired of her tactics. The assessment fees keep rising, but the community improvements she promises never materialize. I'm not the only one asking questions now. After she left, I installed security cameras at key points around my property, a precaution that would prove invaluable sooner than I expected. That evening, I reviewed my growing file of evidence against the HOA. The inconsistent bylaws, the suspicious financial transactions Meredith had flagged, the property records showing no legal HOA registration. I was building a solid case, but I needed a strategy to present it effectively to the community. Many residents had lived under Loretta's intimidation for years and might fear challenging her authority, even with evidence. As I contemplated my approach, a notification popped up on my phone. An email invitation to all residents for an emergency community safety briefing scheduled for the day after tomorrow. The message, signed by Loretta, warned about concerning activities by new residents that threaten our Willowmere values and urged all loyal community members to attend. She was clearly planning a counteroffensive. I decided to hold my own community meeting, but I needed more concrete evidence first. Something that would break through the fear and confusion Loretta had cultivated. My security cameras were in place, my documentation was organized, and I'd spoken with the utility company about the suspicious power outage. All I needed now was for Loretta to make her next move, which I suspected wouldn't take long. As darkness fell, I noticed a car slowly driving past my cabin, headlights off. My security camera captured the license plate, registered to Loretta Vance. She was conducting surveillance, likely planning whatever structural violations her hired inspector would discover tomorrow. I double-checked my cameras to ensure they had clear views of all approach paths to my property. Just after midnight, I received an anonymous email. Leave Willowmere now or face the consequences. We know what you really are. The childish intimidation tactic might have worked on someone else, but it only strengthened my resolve. I traced the email's IP address to the Willowmere Community Center where Loretta had office space. I added this evidence to my growing file, then tried to get some sleep before tomorrow's confrontation. As I drifted off, I remembered something my grandfather used to say. The truth doesn't mind being questioned, it's lies that get defensive. Loretta Vance was becoming very defensive indeed, and I was finally ready to lay out the truth for everyone to see. My security cameras recorded 3 more drive-by observations of my property during the night. The community meeting couldn't come soon enough. I watched in disbelief as the man pretending to inspect my property broke a fence plank with a crowbar, and then I snapped. I had tried to be polite. I had tried to be rational. But now, I was done playing defense. My security cameras captured the entire incident. The inspector surreptitiously looking around before deliberately damaging my property, then taking photos of the damage he'd caused. When I confronted him from my deck, he hurried to his truck and drove away. 3 hours later, an urgent violation notice appeared on my door, citing my damaged perimeter fence as a safety hazard requiring immediate HOA intervention. The notice included a fine of $2,000 for willful destruction of aesthetic continuity. I stood in front of my cabin, holding the notice with trembling hands, anger finally breaking through my careful composure. The psychological warfare and financial intimidation had crossed a line. By 5:30 that evening, my living room had been transformed into a presentation space. Chairs borrowed from Curtis and other supportive neighbors formed neat rows facing my laptop projection on the wall. A table of refreshments, nothing fancy, just cookies and drinks, waited near the entrance. I wore my navy sweater and darkest jeans, a deliberately casual but put-together look that contrasted with the disheveled, controlling image Loretta projected. People began arriving shortly before 6, tentative at first, then in groups of 2 and 3. By 6:15, 23 residents had squeezed into my cabin, including Meredith, Curtis, Warren, and to my surprise, Loretta herself, who arrived last and stood defiantly in the back corner, her flower print dress particularly rumpled today, mud splattered along the hem. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through me. "I've called this meeting because I believe we all deserve transparency about what's happening in our community." I clicked to my first slide, showing the original 1953 property covenants. Willowmere has a long history as a peaceful lakeside retreat. The original agreements between neighbors were simple and focused on mutual respect. I proceeded to outline the legal requirements for establishing a homeowners association in our county, highlighting the steps that had never been taken at Willowmere. With each slide, I noticed residents exchanging glances, some nodding in recognition. Even those who had been avoiding me were now listening intently. Loretta remained stone-faced, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. Moving methodically through my presentation, I shared the county records showing the absence of registered HOA documentation, then transitioned to the financial concerns. Several residents have noted discrepancies between collected fees and community improvements. I displayed a simple chart comparing the reported HOA income against visible expenditures, careful not to make specific accusations but letting the numbers speak for themselves. The gap was substantial and obvious. Additionally, many of the rules being enforced haven't been properly ratified by community vote, as required by state law. I clicked to a slide showing the ever-changing bylaws document, with highlighting indicating sections that had appeared or changed over just the past year. At this point, Loretta pushed away from the wall, her face flushed with anger. "This is slander! You're manipulating documents to turn neighbors against each other." Her voice was shrill, hands gesturing wildly. "He's working for Lakeside Haven. They want to destroy our community and buy our properties for pennies." The room fell uncomfortably silent. I maintained my composure, allowing the outburst to speak for itself. "I have no affiliation with Lakeside Haven or any other development. I'm simply a homeowner concerned about proper procedure and transparency." I clicked to my next slide, which showed the article about luxury redevelopment quoting Loretta herself. "It appears there are indeed plans for property acquisitions at Willowmere, but they didn't originate with me." More murmurs filled the room as residents recognized the implications. An older woman in the front row raised her hand. "Are you saying our HOA isn't legitimate? That we've been paying fees for nothing?" I answered carefully. "I'm saying that proper legal procedures haven't been followed to establish enforcement authority. Community cooperation is valuable, but it should be based on mutual agreement and transparency, not threats and intimidation." Meredith stood up then, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger with each word. "I need to say something. Last month, Loretta asked me to sign backdated meeting minutes approving a special assessment. When I hesitated, she implied my mortgage approval might face community concerns if I didn't cooperate." Several gasps followed this revelation. Another resident spoke up. "She told me my boat dock violated regulations she created the day after I declined to support her landscaping contract bid." More stories emerged: selective enforcement, arbitrary fines, retribution against those who questioned decisions. The dam had broken, and years of frustration poured forth. Through it all, Loretta's expression shifted from anger to a calculated sympathy. Suddenly, her eyes welled with tears. "I've only tried to protect Willowmere. Everything I've done has been for the good of our community, to maintain our property values and beautiful environment." Her dramatic shift to victimhood might have been effective had I not been prepared. "Speaking of our environment," I said gently, redirecting attention to my presentation, "I'd like to address the tree issue that started this conflict." I displayed historical photographs of Lake Willowmere from the 1960s through present day, clearly showing a diverse mix of trees, including numerous maples. The claim that only oak trees are historically appropriate isn't supported by evidence. In fact, the lake's name, Willowmere, comes from the willows that have always been part of this ecosystem. I clicked to county ecological guidelines recommending diverse native species for lakefront properties to prevent disease spread and erosion. The scientific evidence undermined another pillar of Loretta's authority, and I could see more residents nodding in agreement. As the meeting concluded, I played my final card for the evening, the security footage showing the hired inspector damaging my fence, then being cited for the damage he caused. The evidence was irrefutable. Loretta's face had lost its tearful sympathy, replaced by a calculating hardness. "This proves nothing. He's doctored that video." Few seemed convinced by her accusation. I concluded my presentation with a simple proposal. I suggest we meet again tomorrow at the community pavilion to discuss next steps toward establishing a legitimate community association that serves all residents fairly. The positive response was immediate, with several residents volunteering to help spread the word. As the meeting broke into discussion groups, Loretta slipped out the door, her departure barely noticed amidst the renewed community engagement. Later that evening, after the last neighbors had left, I sat on my deck watching the moonlight shimmer across the lake. The meeting had gone better than I'd hoped, with most residents expressing support for a legitimate, transparent community organization. My phone buzzed with an email notification from Loretta. "This isn't over. I've invested too much in Willowmere to let you destroy everything. You have 24 hours to retract your statements and leave, or face consequences." The threat was expected but still unsettling. I knew Loretta wouldn't surrender her power easily, especially with potential development deals at stake. As I contemplated my next move, a text message arrived from Warren. "Check property records for transfer dates. Found something interesting about timing of HOA formation." I smiled into the darkness. The final piece of the puzzle was falling into place. Tomorrow I would reveal my ace card, the truth about who really owned Lake Willowmere. Morning brought a flurry of community activity. Several residents had formed a text group to share information about legal requirements for community associations. Curtis reported that Loretta had been seen loading documents into her car at the community center before dawn. Meredith confirmed unusual withdrawals from the HOA account had been attempted but flagged by bank security protocols. Loretta was clearly preparing for a final stand, consolidating whatever resources she could salvage. Following Warren's tip, I spent the morning at the county records office, requesting certified copies of specific property transfers and boundary surveys. The clerk was becoming familiar with my research. "Finding what you need, Mr. Prescott?" she asked as she stamped the certification pages. "Almost," I replied. "I think today will bring some clarity to the situation." I'd scheduled a community-wide meeting for that evening at the Lakefront Pavilion, neutral territory that belonged to no single resident. Word had spread quickly, and even those who hadn't attended my presentation were planning to come. The stakes were clear. The future governance of Willowmere would be decided tonight. As I prepared my final presentation, incorporating the newly certified documents, I received a notification of an emergency HOA email sent to all residents except me. Urgent meeting change. Legal counsel has advised immediate action regarding property violations. Emergency binding vote tonight at 5 p.m. Community Center. Mandatory attendance. Loretta was attempting to hold her own meeting an hour before mine, likely hoping to push through some form of official action before I could present my evidence. I quickly notified the residents, who supported transparency about this development, suggesting they attend both meetings to witness the proceedings. At 4:45, I arrived at the community center myself, taking a seat in the back of the room with my documentation in hand. The atmosphere was tense as Loretta, wearing her most elaborate flower print dress yet, mud splattered up to her knees, took position at the front table, beside a stern-looking man in an ill-fitting suit, whom she introduced as legal counsel for the association. No firm name or credentials were provided. "Due to urgent circumstances threatening our community standards," Loretta began, her voice higher than usual, "we must take immediate action regarding ongoing violations at Lot 17. The so-called attorney stood, clearing his throat importantly. "As counsel, I recommend immediate commencement of property seizure under Bylaw 7.3, subsection C, which permits emergency action in cases of deliberate community disruption." Several residents shifted uncomfortably, looking uncertain. Meredith raised her hand. "Shouldn't we wait until the property owner is formally notified? Mr. Prescott isn't even here to defend himself." Loretta's expression hardened. "Mr. Prescott has been notified repeatedly of his violations. This matter cannot wait." It was time for me to speak up. "Actually, I am here," I said, standing calmly. A ripple of surprise moved through the room as heads turned toward me, "and I have some important information relevant to this vote." Loretta's face flushed deep red. "This is a closed procedural meeting. You have no standing to interrupt." The attorney nodded in agreement, though he looked increasingly uneasy. I smiled pleasantly, moving toward the front of the room. "Before you vote on anything, I believe everyone should be fully informed about the property in question." Murmurs filled the room as I opened my folder on the front table. "You've heard a lot of talk about HOA rules and fines, but I'd like to tell you who actually owns Willowmere." I placed the first document on the table, gesturing for interested residents to examine it. In 1953, my grandfather, Edward Prescott, purchased the entire eastern shore of Lake Willowmere, including the lake bed itself to the center line. He subsequently sold individual lots for cabins but retained ownership of all common areas, the shoreline, and the lake access points. I laid out more documents showing the precise boundaries. These rights passed to my father and then to me through inheritance. I am the legal owner of the land under this very building, the community dock, the pavilion, and the roads connecting our properties. The room erupted in astonished conversation as residents processed this revelation. Loretta's attorney picked up one of the documents, examining it with growing concern. "These appear to be legitimate county certifications," he admitted reluctantly. Loretta snatched the paper from his hands. "This is impossible. The HOA has been managing these properties for years." I nodded calmly. "Through my family's generosity in allowing community use, yes, but there has never been a legal transfer of ownership to any homeowners association." I placed the final document on the table, my grandfather's will, with the relevant sections highlighted. Furthermore, I'd confirmed with the state regulatory board that the Willowmere HOA was never properly registered as required by law. It has been operating without legal authority to collect fees or enforce rules. The implications settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Years of assessments, fines, and controls had been exercised without legitimate authority. Loretta's composure shattered completely. "You're lying. This is a trick to destroy everything I've built." Her voice rose to a shriek as she waved her arms wildly. "I've protected Willowmere. I've maintained standards. I've kept property values high." In her agitation, she knocked over a water pitcher, sending it crashing to the floor. The room fell silent as water spread across the linoleum. I maintained my calm demeanor. "I have one more piece of information to share." I placed bank records on the table, provided confidentially by the Fraud Investigation Department after Meredith's report. These show transfers from the HOA account to personal accounts and to Canyon View Developers, the company featured in that article about luxury redevelopment at Willowmere. Loretta's face went from red to ashen. "You had no right to access those records. That's private financial information." In her fury, Loretta made a fatal mistake. Those were legitimate consultation fees. I deserved compensation for bringing in potential buyers. Every property I helped sell would have benefited everyone with higher values. The room froze at this inadvertent confession. Her attorney stood abruptly. "I believe we should adjourn this meeting pending further review of the documentation." He gathered his briefcase and headed for the door without looking back. Loretta stared after him in disbelief, then turned back to the residents, desperation in every line of her face. "You don't understand. I was going to share the commissions once the deal went through. It would have been better for everyone." Curtis stood slowly. "So you were planning to sell our community out from under us while collecting our fees and fines?" Other residents joined in, years of suspicions confirmed by Loretta's own words. Cornered and exposed, Loretta grabbed her purse and headed for the door, her mud-splattered dress swishing angrily. "This isn't over. You'll regret this, all of you." Her plastic heel caught on the wet floor, sending her stumbling into the doorframe before she disappeared into the evening light. The remaining residents turned to me with a mixture of shock, anger, and confusion. Warren Tate stood, his legal experience providing a calming presence. "I suggest we reconvene at the pavilion, as planned, to discuss where we go from here." I nodded in agreement. "I have some proposals for how we might structure a legitimate community organization moving forward, if that's what residents want." As we filed out toward the lakefront pavilion, the sense of a community reclaiming its destiny was palpable. The truth had finally emerged, and with it, an opportunity to rebuild Willowmere on a foundation of transparency and cooperation rather than control and fear. $300,000 was substantially above market value for my cabin, a desperate final attempt by Loretta to salvage something from her collapsing schemes. My curiosity piqued. I investigated further before responding. County records revealed Canyon View Developers had been formed just 8 months earlier, with Loretta Vance listed as the agent. A loan agreement showed she had borrowed $1 million from a private equity firm, using promised property acquisitions at Willowmere as collateral. The pieces suddenly fit. Loretta needed my property to satisfy investors and avoid defaulting on a loan she couldn't repay. I crafted a careful response. "Thank you for your interest, but I'm not selling. I am curious about Canyon View Developers' plans for Willowmere." Her reply was immediate. "Plans can include you as a partner. $500,000 for the cabin, plus 10% of development profits. Final offer. Rather than respond, I forwarded the messages to the state regulatory board and county prosecutor, along with documentation of the improper HOA operations. Official investigations would take time, but the legal wheels were now in motion. That afternoon, I met with Warren Tate to discuss options. "You've handled this remarkably well," he commented. "Most people would have capitulated or counterattacked much earlier." I smiled. "Engineering teaches you to understand systems before changing them." Warren nodded. "The question is what to do with your ownership of the common areas. I'd been contemplating this for days. My grandfather wanted Willowmere to be a community, not a fiefdom. The newly formed community committee met that evening. I presented my proposal. I want to transfer ownership of the community spaces to a properly formed, democratically governed association. The committee members exchanged surprised glances. "You'd give up that control voluntarily?" Meredith asked. I nodded, with conditions. The association must remain transparent, fees must be reasonable and tied to actual maintenance costs, and no single person can have unilateral authority. All significant decisions must require a 75% community vote. Later, Richard Kessler from Meridian Investment Partners visited me. Vance assured us she had secured purchase options on key properties, he explained with irritation. We've since discovered this was inaccurate. He pitched a development plan. Luxury condominiums and a private marina requiring removal of most existing cabins. I declined. That vision doesn't align with the community's values or my family's legacy. Willowmere isn't for sale. The following week brought significant developments. State and county investigations began, and property transfer documents were finalized, legally establishing the community association's ownership of common areas with protective conditions. "I never even agreed to this HOA," one elderly resident said during our first official meeting. "If you hadn't stood up, we'd all still be afraid to paint our shutters," another added with a laugh. Loretta was eventually charged with fraudulent misrepresentation and misappropriation of funds. Her plea agreement required restitution to residents and community service maintaining the very areas she'd claimed to protect. During a community cleanup day, I spotted her in a county-issued orange vest over her faded flowered dress, picking up trash along the shoreline. As she bent to collect a crumpled soda can, I watered the wildflowers beside my maple tree. Roots intact, like the truth. Justice had been served, but reconciliation would take longer. That evening, I received an email. Urgent compliance notice, Lakeside Haven Resort Community Association, claiming violations at a property I didn't own. Clearly Loretta's last desperate attempt to create trouble. I closed the email and turned my attention to the peaceful waters of Willowmere, where ancient willows swayed in the evening breeze, their reflections rippling across the surface. "Never pick a fight with someone who loves their home enough to defend it," I whispered, raising my coffee mug in a toast to my grandfather's legacy and the reclaimed spirit of Willowmere. The battle had been worth it, not just for my maple tree or property rights, but for restoring a community based on respect rather than control. If you've ever stood your ground against unjust authority, you understand the satisfaction of seeing justice prevail. Drop a comment about what neighbor drama I should tackle next, because there's always another story waiting to be told.
Another wild tale courtesy of QA Stories. If your jaw's on the floor, you're in the right place. Subscribe and stay shocked.